"If you can fly this plane, I'll marry you." Those were the words that started everything. They weren't spoken out of love or admiration. They were said as a joke. A cruel, mocking challenge from a man who thought money could measure worth. Naomi Carter didn't flinch when she heard them. She stood tall in her crisp pilot's uniform, the sun gleaming against the jet's silver wings behind her. Her expression stayed calm, steady, professional. Years in aviation had taught her that silence often spoke louder than anger. Across from her stood Ethan Blake, a young billionaire known as much for his arrogance as his charm. He smirked, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair as he looked her up and down. "You're telling me you're the pilot?" "A woman," his tone dipped. "And a janitor's daughter?" Naomi met his gaze without blinking. "That's right." The crowd around them, investors, assistants, bodyguards, shifted uneasily. No one dared speak. The jet was ready to depart for a high-profile demonstration flight, a new prototype aircraft designed by Blake Aerospace. But when Naomi had stepped forward as the lead pilot, the billionaire had laughed, assuming she was part of the maintenance crew. He took a slow step toward her. "Tell you what," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you can get that bird off the ground, fly her clean, and land her without crashing, I'll marry you myself." A ripple of laughter spread among the onlookers. Naomi didn't react. She only adjusted her gloves and turned toward the aircraft. "I'll take that as clearance to proceed," she said evenly. Ethan's smirk faltered for a moment. Something about her composure unsettled him, but he shrugged it off. "Go ahead, Captain," he said mockingly. "Show us how it's done." Naomi climbed the ladder, her boots echoing against the metal rungs. Inside the cockpit, her hands moved over the controls like a pianist returning to her favorite song. She didn't hear the laughter outside anymore, only the quiet hum of engines waiting to be awakened. She spoke into the headset. "Tower, this is Captain Carter requesting clearance for takeoff." Static, then a male voice replied, half surprised, half respectful. "Captain Carter, you are cleared. Good luck up there." As the engines roared to life, the world seemed to pause. Dust lifted from the runway, the crowd shielding their eyes from the wind. Ethan's grin faded as the aircraft began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, the sound of power building beneath the steel skin. Within seconds, Naomi pulled back on the yoke. The jet sliced through the sky with precision and grace, climbing higher and higher until it disappeared into the clouds. Down below, no one spoke. Ethan stared upward, the realization sinking in that his joke had just been turned into history. Inside the cockpit, Naomi's face remained calm, but her heart raced. She remembered every insult, every door slammed in her face, every time someone told her a woman like her didn't belong in the sky. This flight wasn't just about proving Ethan wrong. It was about proving that dignity, discipline, and hard work could silence prejudice louder than any argument ever could. The clouds parted. She leveled the jet and performed a flawless barrel roll, sunlight glinting off the fuselage. Gasps erupted from below. The maneuvers she executed were the kind reserved for Air Force veterans, precise, fearless, and graceful. On the ground, Ethan's investors looked at him with raised eyebrows. His confident smirk had vanished. One man whispered, "That woman's flying better than your test pilots." Ethan didn't answer. For the first time in his life, he felt small. Naomi brought the jet around for landing. Her approach was textbook perfect. Steady descent, landing gear deployed at the exact second, flaps balanced, no wasted motion. The tires kissed the runway like silk, and within moments the plane rolled to a perfect stop. Silence, then applause. Even the tower crew was cheering over the radio. Naomi powered down the engines, removed her headset, and stepped out onto the ladder. Her uniform fluttered in the wind as she descended slowly, calmly, like she'd been doing this her entire life. Ethan stood frozen as she walked toward him. Every camera was on her now, every phone capturing the moment. She stopped just inches from him, her eyes locked on his. "You said you'd marry me if I could fly this plane." The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure if she was serious. Naomi smiled faintly. "You don't need to, but you will respect me." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to say something clever, to save face, but the words wouldn't come. Because he knew she'd just done something extraordinary. She turned to the media and simply said, "The future of aviation doesn't care about gender or color. It cares about skill." The applause was thunderous this time. Ethan watched her walk away, realizing that the woman he'd tried to humiliate had just stolen every headline he thought would belong to him. Later that evening, as the sunset turned the hangar gold, Naomi stood by the aircraft alone, tracing her fingers along its metallic frame. She didn't fly for fame or recognition. She flew because the sky was the only place where no one could look down on her. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Ethan. He looked different now. No arrogance, no smugness, just quiet awe. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "You didn't just fly that plane. You flew circles around everything I thought I knew." Naomi looked at him, then back at the fading light. "Apology accepted," she said. "But don't waste it. Make sure no one ever doubts a woman pilot again." He nodded. "I will." As she turned to leave, he added, half smiling, "The offer still stands, you know. If you can fly like that, I might just have to marry you after all." Naomi laughed, shaking her head. "You couldn't keep up." And with that, she walked into the sunset. Strong, graceful, untouchable. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success. The woman who flew the billionaire's jet. Naomi's face filled every screen. Commentators replayed the footage again and again. The roll, the perfect landing, the moment she walked past Ethan Blake without a glance. To the world, she was overnight proof that skill had no gender, no color. To the board of Blake Aerospace, however, she was a problem they hadn't planned for. By noon, reporters crowded the front gate of her small hangar on the edge of Dallas Field. Naomi ignored them and kept working, checking engine readings for her next charter job. When she finally looked up, a sleek black limousine waited outside. The driver handed her a letter embossed with the Blake Aerospace seal. That afternoon, she found herself back inside the same glass building where Ethan had laughed at her only a day before. Now everyone she passed fell silent. The receptionist who once asked for her ID simply stood aside. On the top floor, Ethan waited, not behind his desk, but standing by the window. "I wanted to thank you," he began, voice careful. The test was flawless. "Investors are calling it a miracle." Naomi folded her arms. "You mean my miracle?" he sighed. "Look, the company can make this official. We'll pay you to keep representing us, press tours, ads, the works. We'll call you the face of the new generation." Naomi studied him. "And what happens when the spotlight moves on? When the next woman walks in here, will you laugh at her too?" Ethan didn't answer. She laid the contract back on the table. "I'm not signing anything until you hire pilots like me. Not one, a program, scholarships, training." He hesitated. "That's not how business works." "That's exactly how change works," she replied quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Finally, Ethan said, "You're asking me to rebuild the company from the inside." Naomi nodded. "Start by rebuilding yourself." 3 months later, Blake Aerospace launched the Carter Initiative, the first internship program in the country dedicated to training women and minority pilots. Naomi refused a permanent corporate title. Instead, she worked as chief instructor, teaching others how to take the sky without fear. Each student who climbed into a cockpit carried a small badge engraved with her motto, "Skill has no color." The first graduation ceremony filled the hangar that once echoed with laughter at her expense. Ethan stood on stage beside her, no longer smug but respectful. "Captain Carter," he said into the microphone, "you changed how this company sees the world." "You changed how I see it," she took the mic, her voice steady. "No, the world was always ready to change. It just needed someone willing to take off." Applause rolled through the hangar like an engine roar. Cameras flashed, students cheered, and for one suspended heartbeat, Naomi looked up through the open skylight at a clear blue sky. Somewhere beyond those clouds waited 1,000 more flights, 1,000 more chances to prove that determination could outfly prejudice any day. 6 months after the first Carter Initiative graduation, the skies above Houston shimmered with summer heat. Naomi had just returned from a training session when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Captain Carter? This is the Federal Rescue Coordination Center. We've got a situation." A corporate jet had gone missing over the Gulf. Severe turbulence, last contact at 14,000 feet. On board, the governor's humanitarian delegation and 2 of Naomi's own trainees. The storm that had swallowed the plane was the same kind she'd faced a dozen times in simulators. But this one was real, and every minute mattered. By evening, she was on the tarmac beside an aging Coast Guard transport, wind whipping her hair as crews loaded sonar equipment. Ethan arrived still in a business suit, tie flapping, face pale. "You're not seriously going up in that weather," he shouted over the engine noise. Naomi zipped her flight jacket. "They're my students." "You don't leave your crew behind." The crew chief glanced at her with a mix of respect and relief. "Captain, we could use your hands on the radar." Naomi nodded, climbed aboard, and felt the familiar thrum of engines beneath her boots. The storm outside glowed with flashes of lightning, like the sky arguing with itself. Hours later, they found wreckage. A half-submerged fuselage on a narrow sandbar miles from shore. No radio signal. The rescue copter couldn't land in the crosswind. Naomi scanned the waves, then turned to the pilot. "I can get down there. I'll take the auxiliary craft." The officer hesitated. "That's a one-seat jump jet." "You're not cleared." "She is." Ethan cut in. "If anyone can fly it, she can." The words hit her like an echo from another life. "If you can fly this plane." Naomi smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'd better." The sea rose in whitecaps as the jump jet launched. She skimmed low over the waves. Instruments blinking red, spray streaking across the canopy. Through the rain, she spotted movement. 3 figures waving from the broken wing of the downed jet. One of them raised a flare. She circled once, heart hammering, and guided the craft down in a controlled skid until it rested beside the wreck. The moment her boots hit the metal, she was shouting over the wind, helping strap survivors into harnesses. One of her trainees, barely 20, whispered, "I knew you'd come, Captain." Naomi tightened the buckle. "We look out for each other up here." Minutes later, the hoist lifted them one by one toward the hovering copter. When the last line snapped taut, Naomi was the final person left on the wing. The sea boiled around her. She took one last look at the broken aircraft, the same model she had proved herself in, and saluted before clipping in. As the helicopter climbed through the storm, lightning split the clouds and revealed the endless water below. For the first time in her life, Naomi didn't feel like she was fighting gravity. She was carrying people with her. By dawn, they landed at the coastal base. Reporters crowded behind the fence, but Naomi barely noticed. Her students were alive, the governor safe. Ethan was waiting near the runway, drenched but smiling with something that looked a lot like pride. "You did it again," he said quietly. "Saved them." Naomi wiped rain from her face. "They saved themselves. I just showed them how to trust the sky." He looked at her for a long moment, the morning light turning the puddles to gold. "Naomi," he said, voice low. "That promise I made the first day, maybe it wasn't such a joke after all." She laughed, shaking her head. "You still can't afford me, Blake, but I'll take a new fleet of training aircraft instead." He grinned. Done. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hangars, Naomi stood on the tarmac watching the new recruits gather for orientation. The sky stretched wide and endless, streaked with the last fire of sunset. She thought of the words that had once been a taunt, now turned into her own quiet mantra. If you can fly this plane, you can change the world. And somewhere beyond the clouds, a future pilot was already proving her right. 10 years later, the hangar at Blake Aerospace looked nothing like the one where the laughter had once echoed. The walls were painted with the deep blue and silver crest of the Carter Flight Academy. The floor marked with bright training lanes, and the air filled with the steady rhythm of turbine engines warming up for another class. Naomi Carter walked slowly along the line of trainees, her uniform now marked with 5 gold stripes. She paused beside a young girl strapping on a helmet. The badge on the child's shoulder read Carter Scholar. "First solo today?" Naomi asked. The girl nodded nervously. Naomi smiled. "Remember, trust the instruments, trust yourself, and trust the sky. It hasn't let me down yet." From the mezzanine above, Ethan watched with quiet pride. The years had taken the edge off his arrogance. The same ambition that once mocked others now fueled a foundation that trained hundreds of pilots every year. When Naomi looked up, he raised a small salute. She answered with a grin before turning back to the students. Later that afternoon, the academy gathered for the annual memorial flight. One by one, sleek white jets lifted off, banking in perfect formation against the golden horizon. Naomi's voice came through the intercom, calm and steady. "Flight is the one language that belongs to everyone. When we rise together." Down on the runway, a reporter approached Ethan. "Mr. Blake, is it true you once told Captain Carter you'd marry her if she could fly?" Ethan chuckled softly. "I did. She flew." The truth is, she didn't need a husband. She needed a runway. I just helped build it. As the jets traced white arcs through the evening sky, Naomi guided her students into a slow roll, sunlight glinting off their wings like the reflection of a promise finally kept. On the control board in her cockpit was a small engraving, "If you can fly this plane, you can change the world." She touched the words, smiled, and eased the throttle forward. The clouds opened ahead, vast and bright, and the sound of engines faded into the quiet hum of destiny fulfilled.